Whenever after our usual summer hiatus and the high holidays, we are back to Be'ezrat Hashem, our Wednesday night class. Tonight is October 6th, 2021. It's Rosh Hodesh Mar Heshvan, and in honor of Rosh Hodesh, we're going to deal with a topic having to do with Rosh Hodesh. As we know, on Rosh Hodesh, before Musaf, or in order to pray Musaf rather, we remove our Tefillin. We wear Tefillin for Shahrit, but not for Musaf. The question is, why do we remove it? Should we remove it? And when should the Tefillin be removed, or can you remove them at any time? Now, obviously, we know what we generally see. We generally see that you put away the Sefer Torah, Hasi Kaddish is said, and then they tell you to remove your Tefillin. Everybody hurriedly takes the Tefillin off, puts them on the side. Maybe they're covered, maybe they're not covered, they're definitely not folded. You know, everybody just has a heap of Tefillin straps all over the place, dangling on the floor, on the table, on the chair. Everybody rushes to say the Amidah while thinking about their Tefillin that they keep looking at every 2 seconds. How fast am I going to finish my Amidah now to get to my Tefillin and fold them? So, let's deal with the Tefillin issue. First things first, we go to Shulchan Aruch. Shulchan Aruch, Orach Hayim, Siman Kaf He. In the very beginning of Shulchan Aruch, we have the Chot Tefillin. In Siman Kaf He, 2 halachot we're looking at. Halacha Yud Gimel, Sa'if Yud Gimel, and Sa'if Yud Dalet. They're both in the same Sa'if, both in Sa'if Yud Gimel. Yud Gimel. נהגו העולם שלא לחלוש תפילין עד קידושת ובא לציון. The minhag, the custom of the entire world, the entire Jewish nation, is to not remove tefillin until you say the Kiddushat Ubal Sion. So in Ubal Sion, we have what's called Kiddushat Sidra. That's the Kiddushat that we say in Ubal Sion. And after that Kiddushat of Ubal Sion, that is when it's the custom of the world to remove tefillin. Okay? Not that you have to wait till after Kaddish Kabbal, not that you have to wait till you say Shir Shel Yom, not that you have to wait for Kaddish Heshalama before Kaveh, not until after Ketore, not until after Alinu Shabbeah. Shulchan Aruch is telling you to say the Kiddusha of Ubal Sion and remove tefillin. You want to leave it on longer? Of course you can. But I said this is common practice of all Jews. Then he continues, Ubayom sheyesh bo sefer Torah, נוהגים שלא לחלסם עד שיחזירו ספר תורה ויניחוהו בהיכל. But on a day where the Sefer Torah is out, it is customary to not remove the tefillin until they return the Sefer Torah to the Hechal and place it in the Hechal. Okay, so we give a little extra time because the Torah is there. We don't remove the tefillin. Then he continues, Bayom or Beyom Rosh Hodesh, Halsim Otam Kodem Tefilat Musaf. On Rosh Hodesh, tefillin are removed before praying Musaf, before the prayer of Musaf. Okay? So far, so good, everything is clear. So now, we said that we remove the tefillin before Musaf. Question is, why do we remove them before Musaf? The most simple explanation that's clearly understood and mentioned by most of the sources is because in the Hazara of Musaf, we say Keter. Keter. Our tefillin is a Keter, is a crown as well. We cannot have one crown while mentioning the other crown. So since we're going to be saying Keter, we cannot wear the tefillin. Okay? And since that's going to be the case for Hazara, it applies to the lahash as well. And that is the way the halacha has come down in the Beit Yosef. And that's the way that Adbaz explains it as well. The Lebush, Kedev, the Lebush gives a very nice explanation that I thought of on my own, and I found it in the Lebush. He tells you the Tefillah of Musaf is parallel to the Korban Musaf. And generally we have a Korban Musaf on a holiday. On holidays, we don't wear Tefillin. So therefore, at this point of the day, Rosh Hodesh is a semi-holiday. Once you begin Musaf, that begins the holiday aspect of the day, and therefore you don't wear Tefillin at that point. Makes a lot of sense. So, we need to understand now, when is Musaf? Once we understand when is Musaf, then we can begin to understand what Shulchan Aruch is telling us. Other than that, we need to know that the custom that we currently practice of not removing tefillin until after the Hasik Kaddish, okay, is based upon Shara Kavanot, okay, which is Kabbalistic work of the Ari. And this is quoted by the Hida and Keshet Godel, it's quoted by the Shalmei Sibur, it's quoted by the Hamdat Yamim, the Chol Abraham Al-Kelai, the Beit Obed, the Hesed Alafim, the Ben Ish Hai, they all tell the same thing, and they all tell us this is Sod Gadol. It's a great secret. Okay? In the words of...
When did it start, you'd say?
So if we're talking about the Ari, we're talking about the 1500s. And then all these guys that I'm quoting, whether it's the Hida or the Shalmei Sibur or any of these guys, we're all talking about 1700s onward. Nobody prior to that period. Okay?
So prior to that, they took it off by Obal Sion, everybody.
Well, we're talking about Rosh Hodesh now, so we don't know. We don't have any sort of documentation as to when they took it off. It wasn't something that was brought up. So now if we look at, just one second, we'll come back to you in a second, David. Rabbi Yitzhak Yosef in Yalkut Yosef tells us, Nohagim lahalos et tefillin keshirosim le'palel musaf. The custom is to remove the tefillin before we want to pray musaf. Vayhalesum ahar amirat hasi kaddish velo kodem kaddish. And you remove it only after the hasi kaddish and definitely not before. V'yesh bazeh sod nisgab. And there's a great sword involved here. Doesn't tell us what the sword is. We have no idea what the sword is. V'chen ra'ui linhog. And this is the proper practice. Now, anybody hears Yalkut Yosef, they automatically think Hakham Obadiah Yosef. They don't think it's Rabbi Yitzhak Yosef that wrote it, but Hakham Obadiah. Last night, I said, let me see. What can I find out about Hakham Obadiah Yosef and Tefillin? When did he remove his Tefillin? Lo and behold, go online. Rabbi Yitzhak Yosef has a online question answer. And he says, no, what I wrote in Yalkut Yosef still stands. That is the only time to take off Tefillin after the Hasi Kaddish. Somebody questioned and said, no, but we saw Hakham Obadiah Yosef took off his Tefillin beforehand. He said, no, that doesn't apply to you. He had to go to another room to do something you only saw him one time do it. And he brushed them off. I found another book about the minhagim of Hakham Obadiah Yosef. And over there it says the minhag of Hakham Obadiah Yosef was to always remove the tefillin before the Kaddish, not after. So I went searching. Hakham Obadiah Yosef, in his Hazon Obadiah on Hilchot Hanukkah, place where you wouldn't expect to find it, took me time to track this down. On Hilchot Hanukkah, he goes through all the various sources, talking about the removal of tefillin on Rosh Hodesh and why he decided to throw it to Hanukkah. I guess that was the soonest place he was able to deal with it. But let me read to you what he writes. This is in Hakham Obadiah Yosef. It's on page Shin Aleph. I didn't give it to you because you don't need the whole thing. He tells you on the top part, tells you V'halsina Tefillin kodem Tefillat Musaf. You remove Tefillin before Musaf. He doesn't tell you before Kaddish, after Kaddish. When he goes through the sources on the bottom, okay, he tells you all of a sudden, because if you look at the Kaf Hayim Sofer, quotes Rabbi Abraham Azulai, okay, which is the grandfather of the Hida, and it seems to be a manuscript of the Rabbi Abraham Azulai. He said, according to the ways of the Ari, there is Sod Nisgab, okay? Same words that Rabbi Yishak Yosef used, Sod Nisgab. Shelo yahalos tefillin berosh hodesh, ella ahar kaddish kabal. Until after kaddish kabal. We already finished kaddish kabal, right? We finished Halel, we said kaddish kabal. So any point after that, according to the Sod Nisgab, you can now remove it. So Hakham Obadiah Yosef writes then, Nimsa, Shegam al derech hasod, en lahakpid berosh hodesh leholesan, kodem hakadish lifnei musaf, vechen anu nohagim. Says, plain and simple, we don't have to wait then. If that's the case, we don't have to wait for the other kaddish to say, to remove the tefillin before the musaf. At any point prior to musaf, once we finish that hasi kaddish, once the kaddish kabal rather has been said, at any point from then on, you can then remove the tefillin. And he writes, "Vechach anu nohagim." This is the style of Hakham Obadiah Yosef when he writes about himself, and about a custom that he enacts among his inner circle. Vechach anu nohagim. And this is what we do. So Hakham Obadiah Yosef is giving you testimony that he himself would remove tefillin prior to that hasi kaddish. Now, is it right or wrong? We knocked out the Sod Nisgab from being after this hasi kaddish to being after the kaddish kabal. So now we are looking at things in a different frame of mind. Keep in mind that Ashkenazi Hachamim, like the Eliyah Rabbah and the Mishnah Berurah, both are pro removing the tefillin prior to the kaddish. Okay, the Eliyah Rabbah tells us because it's less disgraceful to the Amidah. It's like, oh wait, Hashem, we're coming to pray, coming to say the Amidah. Let me take off this, this tefillin that you gave us, our pe'er, our glory. Let me take it off to come pray in front of you. The Eliyah Rabbah says it's very disgraceful to do that. The Mishnah Berurah tells us it's like a hifsek now. All of a sudden, you're supposed to be, Kaddish is finishing. You never hear saying Kaddish and then pausing to do something, do an action before starting the Amidah. You finish the Kaddish, you go straight into the Amidah. He goes, how come all of a sudden you're making hifsek over here? It's also inappropriate. So based upon these sources, it looks like it would be proper to move the place of removing the tefillin to prior to that hasi kaddish. And now we're going to look at the source in front of you. And it approaches the entire concept from a different angle. The angle is, when does Musaf begin? If Maran is telling us we remove the tefillin prior to Musaf, the question now is, when is Musaf? Does Musaf begin prior to the hasi kaddish or post the hasi kaddish? Okay, so we're reading from where it says that little 48. Hashe'elahi. Hashe'elahi im kaddish ze hu rak sof tefillat shahrit o shehu gam tefillat musaf. אם קדיש זה שייך כולו לתפילת שחרית, אז אין לחלוש תפילין אלא לאחריו. אך אם קדיש זה הוא גם תחילת תפילת מוסף, אז יש לחלוש תפילין לפניו. So the question is obvious. If the Kaddish is part of Shahrit, then we have to wait till the end of Kaddish. If the Kaddish is part of Musaf, then we remove before the Kaddish. So he goes now to the Shibuleh Haleket. Okay, we're looking at the second paragraph. The Shibuleh Haleket was an Italian Hakham. Okay, we've mentioned him in the past, but we never really looked directly at his works. But the Shibuleh Haleket deals with this issue. He was 13th century Italy. I wrote it down before because I forgot. Okay, Rabbi Sittiya ben Abraham Harofeh. What does he write? He brings a teshuvah from the Ra'abad, where he shows that the Ra'abad is kobeya. He's establishing that the Kaddish as the Hotem, as the final part, the sealer. The Kaddish is the siyum. It's what we finish with. We finish a mizvah, and we have Kaddish, right? In the morning we say Zemirot, then you have Kaddish. Finish reading Torah, you have Kaddish. Finish the Amidah, or if there's supposed to be Tahanunim afterwards, you finish that section, Kaddish. You finish Hashem Obadiah Yosef, you have Kaddish. You finish Shir Shel Yom, you have Kaddish. You have a dirasha, you have a speech, you have a class, then you have Kaddish. The Kaddish always comes to conclude. But the Shibuleh Haleket himself gives another explanation in Kaddish, and he says this is lehafsik. This comes to break, to interrupt between various sections. So, for example, why do we say Kaddish in the morning after the Zemirot? Okay, is because to show us that we are starting a new section. So if we're starting a new section, that means it's a starter. Okay, it's the beginning of. So from the Shibuleh Haleket, we're not clear now. Is the Kaddish a closing statement or an opening statement? So now we go to look at the Rambam. If you look at Rambam in Hilchot Tefillah, Perek Tet, Halacha Aleph. Okay, Mark, you have it open for us, I'm sure. Rambam tells us, right? Seder Tefillot Sibur Kachu tells us the order of the prayers for the Sibur. Bashar Hakol Ha'am Yoshbin, the whole Kahal is sitting down. Veshaliach Sibur Yored Lefnei Teba. There's no Hazan up there, okay? The Hazan goes down to the Teba. You have to think that in the ancient days, they were like an amphitheater, okay? Stadium seating, and the Hazan would descend to the center. And he stands in the middle, in the center. So the Hazan opens up with Kaddish. Kaddish is the opening. Everybody answers Amen, etc., with all the strength, all their might. Amen, Besof Kaddish, answer Amen at the end. So it's very, very clear. Until that point of that first Hasi Kaddish, there is no Hazan. And the Hazan only approaches his job to open up the prayer with Hasi Kaddish. Hasi Kaddish is the opener. But later on, Rambam says that every prayer ends with Kaddish. So we find that Kaddish is both an opener, okay? It opens up the prayers. That Hasi Kaddish is the opener of the prayer, okay? And it also concludes the prayer. What's the closing of the prayer that we're talking about? We're talking about Kaddish Kabbalah. That would end the prayer. Because once Kaddish Kabbalah is said, you're saying, Hashem, accept our prayer, and you're done. Okay, you wouldn't be saying anything afterwards. שבסוף הבא שליח ציבור אומר קדיש לעולם, קודם כל תפילה ואחר כל תפילה. So in his sidur, or in his directions for his sidur, he tells us that the prayer opens with Kaddish and ends with Kaddish. And every Amidah, kol Amidah, hayyebet la'adhil b'Kaddish, l'stayim b'Kaddish. Every Amidah has to open with Kaddish and end with Kaddish. Now, over here, we're talking about the Yoser in the morning. These are all the berachot of the Shema and Amidah, so they're all one fell swoop, and that's why it opens up with that Kaddish at that point. So now we finish Shibud HaLeket, we finish Harambam. We go to the Ribash. The Ribash in his Teshuvot explains, מדוע אין אומרים קדיש מיד אחר ספר תורה במנחה של שבת ושל יום כיפורים של תעניות. Right? On Shabbat Mincha, we finish Sefer Torah, there's no Kaddish. Right away, Mizmor Shirim Shabbat, Yehalelu, there's no Kaddish right after the Sefer. Same thing on Kippur, same thing on a fast day. Okay? It's only Shabbat Mincha, and at this time Kippur, okay, we delay the Kaddish until the Torah is returned to its place. So we could stand for our prayer, okay, coming right out of the Kaddish. Because if you say Kaddish right after the Torah, then they can't go and say another Kaddish again to connect to the Amidah. They already said Ashrei before the reading of the Torah, right? Shabbat Mincha we said Ashrei before. The same thing with Ashrei of a Mincha Ta'ani. So the Ribash explains his reasoning over here. If you have to stand for the Amidah through the prayer of the Kaddish, and you're not supposed to interrupt between them, he hefsek ben Kaddish la'amidah, and he sees the returning of the Sefer Torah to the Echal as a hefsek, as an interruption to the Amidah. Kach halisat tefillin hefsek ben Kaddish la'amidah. So therefore, removing of the tefillin is also going to be a hefsek between the Kaddish and the Amidah. Okay, so therefore, those communities, whether we're talking about Eidot HaMizrach or the Ashkenazim, that at all these other times don't say, the Kaddish till afterwards, so they connect it, then that would be the same thing over here. We need to connect our Kaddish before the Musaf to the Musaf prayer and begin the Amidah of Musaf immediately after the Kaddish. That being said, you would then have to remove your tefillin prior to the Kaddish. Okay? Now, we're not going to see anything substantial after this point. It tells them again, Abraham. Okay, then the Kaf Hayim, Fima Shkatab, the Airport, according to Shabbat, he's talking about Shabbat. Again, nothing to do with us. Then he's talking about the Bush talking about Shabbat. Okay, the Mishnah Berurah, boom, boom. Everybody over here is telling us nothing more than we already know. Hakham Obadiah Yosef, back to his Hazon Obadiah, comes and tells us that we have no reason to have to wait unless you understand the sword, okay, and then you follow the sword of the original sword of Tefillat of Kaddish Kabal. You already covered yourself with that. You're going to come and not pray the Amidah properly because either you're rush taking over your Tefillin and they're falling on the floor, or you're worried that your Tefillin is going to get mixed up with the next guy's Tefillin, or you forgot which one was your. Let's say you had two pairs of tefillin, a Rashi and a Rabbeinu Tam, and you forgot which Rosh or which Yad belonged to this set or that set, and you're going to get confused. And the entire time you're fumbling, your whole entire tefillah becomes a joke. Remove your tefillin like a human being beforehand, and then say the Amidah after immediately after the Kaddish. And there's no reason to have any sort of hifsik. So this is all I wanted to show with this topic. Is that people rush to say, don't remove it, tefillin, don't take it off. Okay, don't take it off according to that school of thought based upon the Ari and Shara Kavanot and all the Hachamim that followed afterwards that read it this way. Hakham Obadiah Yosef found a different way of looking into the sword and the Shara and the teachings of the Ari through the teachings of Bi Abraham Azulai that's called in the Kaf Hayim Sofer, which generally follows the ways of the Ben Ish Hai, but he found another into it. Plus, he's giving other ta'amim for it. Now we're finding over here, Rabbi Toledano is showing us that Kaddish needs to be connected to the Amidah like in any other prayer. Based upon all these things, if you feel more comfortable and you want to then remove your tefillin beforehand, it may make a lot more sense. This is my piece on removing Kaddish. I see somebody has a question. So if you have a question, let's hear it to make it a lot easier. Anybody? Somebody's hand was up, no?
I didn't raise my hand, but what source is this? Who wrote this?
Which one? What you read right now?
The one we have the PDF. Yeah.
The PDF from what we said is Rabbi Toledano.
Rabbi Toledano. Okay, thanks.
Okay, Rabbi Shlomo Toledano. We've quoted from his stuff before. This is one of his weaker pieces, but together with the other sources that I found, and together with Hakham Obadiah Yosef, it all comes together to give us a lot more strength in allowing a person, if you will, because I'm not looking to buck the current minhag, but for many people, this minhag, as you will, which is based upon the sword, and if it's a sword nizgab and we really cannot connect with it whatsoever, and it's going to make our tefillah not have kavanah, then that defeats the whole point of the sword. Okay, the sword is there to help you be even more channeled in and have more kavanah and more of a thought process of your tefillah. And if it's going to end up causing you to not have any kavanah in your tefillah, I know I've had that issue personally many times where, yeah, you're just not getting into it. Now also you're thinking, am I going to finish the Amidah fast enough? Am I going to be able to fold my tefillin before we start, Hazara? Am I going to have to start in between? Am I not? Am I allowed to touch? Then you have people have come to me. Am I allowed to touch it during the Hazara? Do I have to wait till after we finish praying, to fold it? Because if we're not allowed to have tefillin, maybe it's haram to touch it.
You're saying take it off and fold it beforehand.
Take it off, fold it beforehand. Yeah, why not?
Yeah.
I can't, based upon the sources, I can't see why not. Get to Ubal Sion, okay, the Kedusha de Sidra, and you can take it off. Now, the only problem that we have with that, though, is that Shulchan Aruch himself told us on a day that Sefer Torah is out, we wait. Right? So, here is what...
Yeah.
So, what you can easily do, okay, Kaddish Kabbalah is said, all right? Quickly say, Ubal Sion, go in the corner and take it off, or walk out into the hallway and take it off. It's not a big deal if that works for you. Everybody, you have to figure out what works for you. But my point is to show that everybody tells you can't take it off, you can't take it off. It's not that you can't take it off. You can take it off. Okay, and for some people, it may be the best option to take them off. And if somebody like Hakham Obadiah Yosef was able to find a reason to take it off and said, V'chach anu nohagim, okay, he was firm about it, and his son is trying to, to push aside his father's actions, tells you there's a lot more to it. And I think it's something that people aren't aware of. I think it's important to be aware of it. I don't think that if we went back in time 100 years, that everybody was so scrupulous in not taking off tefillin until after Hasi Kaddish. Okay, I think there were definitely people. In fact, I know for a fact that even 40 years ago, you would see people taking them off before Kaddish and during Kaddish, and nobody said a word to them. But nowadays, everybody's like, you can't do it, you can't do it. You could do it. Michael, you have a question? No?
Yeah. I have a question. Isn't it aib or haram to? Because what we were taught in high school or in elementary was to take it off and then leave it unwrapped, pray, and then only wrap it, so that, because we would usually do Koram for Musaf. So what I'm saying is, are you allowed to leave to unwrapped at any point, or isn't it like part of the rules of tefillin. They have to, you know, take care of it and give it respect.
Well, tefillin always has to be treated respectfully. And now, if the straps themselves are dangling, onto the floor, you have to remove it. And we've all seen it happen where we rush to take off our tefillin, we throw it there on the side, not exactly throw, but we quickly lay them aside. And while we're in the middle of Amidah, we always want to see the straps unravel and start falling onto the floor, and things like that happen. So, are you allowed to leave it unwrapped? Yes, you are definitely allowed to leave it unwrapped. Okay. Should you cover the batim? Yes, you should cover the batim. Covering the batim, though, I wouldn't say it's something that's haram or not haram, but it's more of a concern of them falling down and then losing their square shape. Okay, they fall down, they bang, and then they lose that perfect squareness that they're supposed to have. That's really the concern more than anything else. You can't say that it's a suit to leave tefillin uncovered. Okay. I guess that's it. Everybody's dead silence here.
I have one more question. I remember,
Yeah, good.
by Obadiah Yosef, once I was taking off my tefillin, and Rabbi Shama yelled at me that I had to do it after Baruch Eloheinu or something like that. But somewhere in that part, what was that about?
Once you finish the kedusha of Obadiah Yosef, okay, you finish kadosh, 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 and if you want to be mahmir, okay, till Amunayim Nochli Olam Va'ed, that's it. You don't need to go further than that, and we just saw Shulchan said it straight out. You definitely don't need to go further than that. Ket Hashem Tov talks about this also. I remember one of our earlier classes, we dealt with the time to take off tefillin. Ket Hashem Tov said everybody takes off tefillin right after Ubal Sion. So maybe Rabbi Sham was trying to tell you, wait till the end of the paragraph of Ubal Sion. Okay, before you start the next paragraph of Baruch Eloheinu Sheberon Chodo. But that's it. Can't really tell somebody that it's haram to remove it once you've said the Kiddusha the Sidra. Okay. Even removing it before that is not haram. It's customary to wait till that point. Once you finish the Amidah, technically, you can remove it. Okay. And based upon what we saw from the Kitab Yad of Abraham Azulai, that once the Kaddish Kabbal is said, so that's done. On Rosh Hodesh, Kaddish Kabbal is said right after the Halel. Okay, so that's not a problem. So maybe if you want to appropriate the Kaddish Kabbal teaching to a regular Yom Hol, to a regular day, then you would have to wait till the end of regular Kaddish Kabbal to remove it. But more than that, no.
He has his hand up again.
Yes, I see another hand up over there.
So, question: What if one is praying beyachid and there's no keter?
Right. So praying beyachid and no keter, I looked into it, and it's still because Musaf is meant to have the keter according to our tradition. You still have to remove it. Now, some Ashkenazi rabbis say otherwise, but it's not the accepted position even among Ashkenazim. Now, I expected Barry or somebody else to bring up the issue of Keter and Musaf, and Yemenites don't remove their tefillin. They don't remove the tefillin because they don't say Keter and Musaf. They say Nakdishach. Okay, so if somebody comes and tells you, oh, we follow the Yemenites, we follow Rambam, and we don't remove our tefillin, there's no reason to take them off, they're not saying Keter. Keep that in mind. Okay? And so now they're going to come and tell you, oh, the Keter introduction to Musaf on Rosh Hodesh, comes from outside sources, it's against Rambam. This is what we do. Nobody's changing, and going back to Nakdishach within our world, at least, that I could think of. And this is what we follow. We have Keter in Musaf, and since Keter is in Musaf, there's no tefillin for the various reasons that we mentioned. Either because the Keter is being said and we're wearing the Keter, or because it's like we said, like a holiday in that sense. So we're done with that. Anything else? Okay. Class dismissed. How are the Shalom Barach?